cooler and the rains is a benefit too, Lord, to help crops along, Lord, and just give all glory to you for that, Lord. You know you're in control. When it rains, and when it doesn't, it doesn't. And your hand is in it for whatever reason, Lord. We just praise you. We do thank you for the good reports. We just pray that things go well with Miss Porterfield and her rehab, and that all of this helps Eddie get along and cope better than he's been able to. Try to take care of things on his own. And Father, I just ask that you be with Ricky Till's family, Lord, his girls and his wife, Lord, this time when he's fast, and Connie and Trey, and the rest of the family, Lord. Just also ask that you watch over Mr. Buddy, continue to help his elbow heal, and Eddie and his back, and all these things. And we just praise you that Betty's been able to get her appointment moved up to just in the next week or so, 2 weeks. We just ask that things go well with that appointment, and them being able to diagnose, figure out what's going on, and offer some positive input and solutions for her being able to cope. And we just lift up the youth as they gather tonight, and just ask that you work in their lives and the leaders' lives and those providing meals, that all are blessed at your hand, Lord. And as Mike added, gave Ziegler back, Lord, and he's dealing with this situation with this cancer coming back as another stressor in his life, as opposed to trying to just do life normally, Lord. And we just ask that you help him and his family to cope with all of those things, that your peace and your guidance be what the focus is and the answers are, rather than relying solely on self and believing everything that the doctors say, because we know you are a great physician. You heal us in the worst of times, and you heal us in the easiest of times, Lord. And we just praise you for that, Father. And there are many other names and needs, some unnamed, and all of them you know. We just ask your hand move mightily in all of these lives, Lord, so that yours is the power, the glory, for your kingdom. It's glory. We just ask these things in your precious name, Jesus.
Our Heavenly Father, we come to you again this night to lay our concerns and our requests at your feet. We know your greatness. Be it in your will, you'll look after the folks that are on our prayer list and give consideration to our affairs of our hearts. The Bible tells us that if we don't praise you, the very rocks will cry out. We want to praise you tonight, Lord, and come to you with grateful hearts for all that you do for us. We can't possibly comprehend your greatness. Let
Ms. Bernadine lifted up the pastor and his family. We also lift up Jackson now as he comes before us and brings your word to us, Lord. We just ask that you involve him in that way, and all things will flow from you. Thank you, Jesus.
Father God in heaven, I thank you for this opportunity to come to your house of worship and to fellowship with each other and to offer up our
Grandma said, Pastor Chris is on vacation this week, and he asked me to cover for him, so I'm going to do my best. Turning your Bibles, if you will, to Habakkuk chapter 3. And if you can, put a bookmark or a finger or what have you in Mark chapter 9. Habakkuk chapter 3 and Mark chapter 9. And while you turn, I want you to think about the last time you had a crisis of faith. Was it fairly recent, or was it a while ago? Did you resolve it fairly quickly, or did you have to sit and think on it for a bit? When was the last time you had a crisis of faith? Now notice I didn't ask if you've had a crisis of faith. Well, that's just because the crisis of faith is part of a Christian life. It's one of the very few constants in the world. Deuteronomy, God refers to the Israelites as a faithless generation. Mark chapter 9, as we'll see, Jesus refers to the people gathered around him as a faithless generation. And I can't be the only one who, as I get older, I stop laughing at the Israelites for turning away from God every 5 seconds and start saying, yeah, that's me. That's me, and I need to work on it. A crisis of faith is just part of a Christian life. That means we need to know how to fight against them, how to effectively combat them. The first step, I think, to learning how to combat a crisis of faith is to define it. And the first step to defining a crisis of faith, I believe, is to define faith. Now, I don't know about you, but for the longest time, I never really had a definition of faith. I could point it out. I knew it when I saw it. I could look at someone and say, that is a man or woman of great faith. But I could never really give you a Merriam-Webster style definition. I've been reading Mere Christianity, though, by C.S. Lewis. Fantastic book. I'd highly recommend it. And Mr. Lewis had not just one definition, but two. Two definitions of faith. The first one, I believe, could apply to just about anyone in just about any walk of life, but the second one, I believe, applies almost exclusively to Christians. Let's start with that first definition. The first definition, and I'm paraphrasing here, the first definition of faith that C.S. Lewis gives is the ability to hold on to your logic and your reason in the face of emotions and circumstance. I'll give you an example. When something goes wrong with my car, I try to fix it myself. And, unfortunately, right now, all that involves is changing the oil or plugging a flat tire or something like that. But I still do what I can. And I'm sure most of you know that working on a car usually means working under a car. Here's the problem with that, church. I hate tight spaces. Hate them. So, invariably, what happens is I roll out the floor jack. He put it under my car on a nice steel beam. I pump it up, and then I put those jack stands underneath it as a little extra insurance. And then I crawl under the car. And I start thinking, that jack stand went up mighty easily. It could probably come down pretty easily. And those jack stands that I have for extra insurance, well, when I was putting them under, they rattled a little bit. Seemed a little shaky. And I start thinking, how much is that car going to hurt when it comes down? But then I remember, I've done this before. Done it 10, if not 15 times since I bought that car. I changed the oil in it. And not a single time has that jack given out on me. If it hasn't given out before, why would it do that? Why would it do so now? So I grit my teeth, I grab my screwdriver and my Allen wrench and what have you, and I get to work. Holding on to logic and reason in the face of emotions and circumstance. And like I said, that can apply to pretty much anyone in pretty much any walk of life. I'm sure you can think of a couple of everyday examples. But what about a biblical example? Well, for that we turn to Habakkuk chapter 3. Now, Habakkuk is a relatively short book. I would recommend you read it on your own time. But for the sake of brevity, tonight I'm going to sum up chapters 1 and 2. Habakkuk prophesied during the reign of King Manasseh of Judah. Manasseh, as 2 Kings puts it, did what was evil in the sight of the Lord. He erected shrines and monuments to pagan gods in the house of the Lord. He sacrificed children to Moloch. He dealt with necromancers and mediums and witches. And on top of all that, Judah at the time was paying tributes to the Assyrian Empire. And if you know anything about biblical history, you know that the Assyrian Empire cared nothing for the citizens of Judah. So in the midst of all this, Habakkuk cries out to God, God, why do you allow this? Don't you see your people suffering? Don't you see justice being perverted? Why do you allow this? God answers, I'm not allowing this. Not for much longer, anyway. I'm raising up the Babylonian Empire. And they are going to overthrow the Assyrian Empire. They're going to overthrow the Judean throne. And you're going to be held captive for a time. Habakkuk says, well, what sense does that make, God? The Babylonians are even worse than Manasseh. Why are you elevating them? God says, in time I'll lay them low too. I'll set you free from captivity. The Babylonians will get theirs, Habakkuk. Don't you worry about that. And of course, they did. Let me see here. About 54 years after Habakkuk was written, give or take, the Babylonian Empire sacked Judah and the Assyrian Empire. And then about 48 years after that, the Medes and the Persians conquered the Babylonian Empire. But of course, Habakkuk doesn't have the benefit of hindsight like we do. And even if he did, he would still have to soldier on through all that time, trusting that God would keep his word. So what does Habakkuk do? Well, Habakkuk remembers another time when Israel, Judah, they're two parts of the same kingdom. Anyway, when God's people were held in captivity and then released. Habakkuk chapter 3, we're not going to go through the whole thing, but I'm going to hit the highlights. Habakkuk chapter 3, verse 3. God came from Teman, and the Holy One from Mount Paran. His splendor covered the heavens, and the earth was full of his praise. Teman is a word meaning the south. And Egypt lay to the south of Judah. Mount Paran is in reference to the wilderness that the Israelites camped in during their exodus from Egypt. Chapter 3, verse 5, before him went pestilence and plague followed at his heels, referencing the plagues that God sent upon Pharaoh and Egypt to convince them to let his people go. Chapter 3, verse 8. Was your wrath against the rivers, O Lord? Was your anger against the rivers, or your indignation against the sea, when you rode on your horses, on your chariot of salvation? Rivers referencing not only the Nile River, which God turned to blood, but also the Jordan River. whose flow God stopped so that the men carrying the Ark of the Covenant could cross on dry land. Against the sea, of course, that's in reference to the Red Sea, which God parted, again, so that his people could cross on dry land, only to bring it crashing back down on the heads of Pharaoh and his soldiers as they pursued. Chapter 3, verse 13, you went out for the salvation of your people, for the salvation of your anointed. You crushed the head of the house of the wicked, laying him bare from thigh to neck. Crushed the head of the house of the wicked in reference to Pharaoh, thigh to neck. Egyptian armor back in those days consisted mostly of a tunic made from rawhide. A tunic is a kind of shirt, covers everything below the neck and above the thigh. God stripped away their armor, rendered them defenseless. The mighty empire was brought to its knees. Now, of course, just because he's able to hold on to his logic and his reason doesn't immediately dispel his anxieties, his fear. As he himself acknowledges in verse 16, I hear and my body trembles, my lips quiver at the sound, rottenness enters into my bones, my legs tremble beneath me, yet, I will quietly wait for the day of trouble to come upon people who invade us. God did it before, he can do it again. That jack held that car up before, he can do it again. Habakkuk's response is perfectly logical and perfectly reasonable. Makes sense to anyone with a sound mind. The problem with that is, church, humans are not always logical and reasonable, are we?
No.
I pay for my gas with cash, so I got to go in before I pump. Well, I know I don't need that honey bun on the back wall. That's an extra $1.50 I could pocket. And that's, an extra bit of fat that I could keep off me. And yet, 5 minutes later, I'm out at the pump, nozzle in one hand, honey bun in the other. Humans aren't always logical and reasonable, are we? So, what do we do when we can't hold on to our logic and our reason? What do we do when we simply don't have faith? It's easy, church. We have faith. Because remember, C.S. Lewis gave 2 definitions of faith. And this second one, as I said before, I believe applies almost exclusively to Christians. This definition becomes apparent to the Christian when they try to live up to God's standards all on their own and realize it's impossible. They just can't do it. They try to be brave and they realize they're a coward. They try to be honest and they realize they're a liar. They try to be faithful and they realize that they are faithless. But we worship a God that can change things. We worship a God who is not content to sit and watch us struggle in vain. We worship a God who wants to help us. And so, faced with these impossible standards, we try anyway to live up to them, knowing that God will help us get closer to them, trusting that God will help us. And that is the second definition of faith. For a biblical example of this, we turn to Mark chapter 9. Mark chapter 9, I imagine you are familiar with this story. Mark chapter 9, we're going to start in verse 14. And when they came to the disciples, they saw a great crowd around them, and scribes arguing with them. And immediately all the crowd, when they saw him, were greatly amazed and ran up to him and greeted him. And he asked them, "What are you arguing about with them?" And someone from the crowd answered him, "Teacher, I brought my son to you, for he has a spirit that makes him mute. And whenever it seizes him, it throws him down, and he foams and grinds his teeth and becomes rigid. So I asked your disciples to cast it out, and they were not able." And he answered them, "O faithless generation, how long am I to be with you? How long am I to bear with you? Bring him to me." And they brought the boy to him. And when the spirit saw him, immediately it convulsed the boy, and he fell on the ground and rolled about, foaming at the mouth. And Jesus asked his father, "How long has this been happening to him?" And he said, "From childhood, and it has often cast him into fire and into water to destroy him. But if you can do anything, have compassion on us and help us." Pause. If you can do anything. Now, by this point in his ministry, Jesus has performed quite a bit of miracles. He's turned water to wine. He's healed a withered hand, a paralytic, a blind man. He's raised a man's daughter from the dead. And he's cast out demons. He has cast out a singular demon from a person, and he's cast out a legion of demons from a person. And surely the Father has heard of some of this, because you can't keep something like that quiet. And surely he believed these stories, because otherwise, why would he bother bringing his son to Jesus Christ? Logically, the Father knew that Jesus could help. He'd done it before. And yet, he finds himself standing before Christ saying, "If you can, help us." Verses 23 and 24. And Jesus said to him, "If you can, all things are possible for one who believes." Immediately the father of the child cried out and said, "I believe, help my unbelief." I believe, help my unbelief. I've prayed that prayer before. Help my unbelief. The father doesn't have faith. But he believes that Jesus can give him faith. He believes that Jesus can help him hold on to that logic, that reason. That Jesus can help him be faithful, give him faith. Jesus can give faith to a faithless man. And he does. Verses 25 through 27. And when Jesus saw that a crowd came running together, he rebuked the unclean spirit, saying to it, "You mute and deaf spirit, I command you, come out of him, and never enter him again." And after crying out and convulsing him terribly, it came out, and the boy was like a corpse, so that most of them said, "He is dead." But Jesus took him by the hand and lifted him up, and he arose. Just like that, Jesus answered both prayer requests. He cast out the demon, and he gave that father faith. I find it hard to believe that this man, after seeing his son, who had been afflicted with this evil spirit since he was, well, probably as long as the father could remember, that evil spirit suddenly, in a matter of minutes, possibly seconds, relieved of that. I find it hard to believe that whenever his faith was challenged in the future, he didn't remember this moment and say, "God's done it before. He can do it again." Now, these are two very different responses to a crisis of faith. Because if you'll read Habakkuk chapter 3, you'll see that he wrote that in the form of a hymn to be given to the choir master and played with string instruments he recalled events of the past. The father, on the spur of a moment, cried out a single sentence. But there was one commonality between the two. Let's read on. 28 through 29. And when he had entered the house, his disciples asked him privately, "Why could we not cast it out?" And he said to them, "This kind cannot be driven out by anything but prayer." There it is. Habakkuk prayed. He asked God. God answered. And Habakkuk prayed again, praising God, remembering the past providence of God. Habakkuk prayed. The Father spoke to Jesus. The Father prayed. That's how we combat a crisis of faith, folks. We pray. It might not look the same as him or something as something as emotional as the Father. It can take many different forms, but either way, that's how we beat a crisis of faith. We talk to God, and we listen for His answer. Y'all got anything you'd like to add? Any comments, questions?
You know what it reminded me of what you were talking about? And I guess we're all older, so Star Trek. You know, Spock always said that wasn't logical. He didn't use faith. He used logic, and Kirk always used like faith that his equipment would do it. And, you know what I'm saying? I thought about, you talking about examples. Spock would always say, "That's not logical," and Kirk would always come up, "It doesn't matter," because he used faith in human faith instead of whatever Vulcan he was or whatever.
Well, and usually who would win out? The result was
Yeah,
generally-
Kirk would always win because he used faith
Yeah.
and regular human beliefs, Anyway, that's kind of crazy
Oh, good point.
right-wing stuff,
I suppose I'll have to take your word for it. I've never actually seen Star Trek.
My bad.
No, it's fine. I'm just sounded funnier in my head.
Probably a good show.
A few around here, I'm sure saw it.
That's before his time.
That's why I just realized that. Kind of like I just want to remember stay in the corner right now,
Well, God tells us that Jesus said if we have the faith of a mustard seed, we can move a mountain.
Mhm.
And we know with God all things are possible. But we also know that God does not answer every prayer.
people, they think, well, I'll pray about it and this will happen because I've asked God. It's like going to the genie in the bottle.
Yeah.
Here's my wish.
Yeah.
But God answers prayer even when we think it's unanswered.